Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in the JFK Park. Please now take a moment to silence your cell phones. And join me in welcoming Harvard College undergraduate, Natasha Pereira.
Thank you, Safina. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum here at the Institute of Politics. My name is Natasha Pereira, and I'm a first year at the college studying economics and English, and I'm a member of the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum Committee. Tonight, we have the distinct pleasure of hosting a conversation with our distinguished guest, Karine Jean-Pierre. A trailblazer in American politics, Ms. Jean-Pierre made history as the first Black person and first openly LGBTQ individual to serve as the White House press secretary. Her tenure in the Biden administration was marked by a steadfast commitment to transparency, accessibility, and democratic values. Before stepping behind the White House podium, Ms. Jean-Pierre built a career at the intersection of politics, media, and advocacy. Previously, she served as the deputy press secretary to her predecessor, Jen Psaki, from 2021 to 2022, and as the chief of staff for Vice President candidate Kamala Harris in her 2020 election bid. Prior to working for Harris in 2020 and then with the subsequent Biden administration, Jean-Pierre was a senior advisor and national spokeswoman for the progressive policy group MoveOn.org. She was also previously a political analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and a lecturer in international and public affairs at Columbia University. Beyond politics, she is a vocal advocate for representation and inclusion. You can read more about her belief in the promise of America in her 2019 memoir, Moving Forward. This conversation tonight will be moderated by Brittany Shepard, ABC political reporter and current IOP resident fellow, and Anushka Chander, a senior at Harvard College. Prior to joining ABC News, Brittany Shepard was a regular political analyst on CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and SiriusXM. And now you can find her work across all ABC News platforms like streaming, radio, TikTok, podcasts, 538, the list goes on. Anushka Chander is a senior here at the college from Washington, D.C., studying social studies and African American studies with a focus in women's rights, racial justice, and the law. Anushka is a fellow member of the forum and a trained lobbyist for voting rights, gun violence prevention, and racial justice. Essentially, we have the opportunity to hear from incredible women tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of applause to welcome our guests, Karine Jean-Pierre, Brittany Shepard, and Anushka Chander to the forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, flowers for us. Oh,
So beautiful.
I know.
Hi, guys. Hi, everybody.
Oh my gosh.
Not bad, 6:04.
No, yeah, we'll be right on time. Don't worry, I'm air traffic controlled, I always like to say. You know, I feel compelled just to ask you first, Karine, how are you? How are you doing right now? No pressure. Not
No
a lot of
pressure.
at all.
No pressure. That's actually the easy question. Hello, hello. So, the last time I've watched the news
Don't rub it in.
was January 20th when I was at the White House. I've not watched the news. I have really tried to focus on self-care.
Yeah.
I've really tried to focus on my daughter. I have a 10-year-old. And I have done, I think the best way to say this is I have deprogrammed myself so that I could be a civilian again. I used to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. Like, that was my schedule every day for 4 years. And I thought that when I stepped away from the lectern, the podium, that I would have this, like, adrenaline, like I would need to feed my, like, I need to be doing something.
Right.
And I have not missed it at all.
Whatever's in your water, I need it.
I have not missed it. But I do want to say it was an honor and a privilege to have the job, to be the White House press secretary, and I would do it again easily, but I don't miss it.
Yeah, I'm very jealous of whatever self-care tips you can slip in throughout all of this.
I have to. I have a kid that I got to raise. I gotta be present for her, and self-care is really, really important. So I'm doing okay. This is like the first time I've actually done anything, so.
Well, thank you for doing it with us. Let's make a little news tonight. You might as well,
I gotta
right?
tell you.
Yeah, they want it too, right?
I got to tell you, you got to thank Mike Donnellan. When he asked me to do this, and I said, anything you want, I am here. I did not know what I said yes to. But when Mike asked me to do this, it was an easy yes, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you, so thank you. I've met some students here, and you all are incredibly brilliant and smart and caring, and it's impressive. It makes me feel better about the world. So thank you.
Yeah, they make me feel old a lot of the time too. They're like, what are beepers?
Well, Brittany, like, I'm not, I already feel old, but yes, I feel you on that.
Well, let's have an interesting conversation tonight, and I really appreciate all that. And actually, it's a good segue to what's top of mind for me, because I know a lot of journalists are probably watching on this live stream, desperate to make deadlines. So I'm going to ask you the big question first.
Oh, gosh. What's
next for Karine Jean-Pierre?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I would love to know myself. I want to take time to figure that out. I feel like I owe myself that.
Yeah.
I do think I want to have a voice in the moment. I don't know what that looks like yet. And I mean, you have to think about it. I was in the job for 2.5 years, and what I was living and breathing was the job. And so it's going to take a little bit of time to deprogram and to get on the other side of that. I am the longest serving female press secretary, which is insane when I learned that.
Wow.
But that tells you that, you get burned out in these jobs. So I'm excited about what's next. I feel like I want to be very much in control of what's next. But I don't have a job to announce at this time.
All right, well, circle back at the end. I thought it was fascinating. You said you want to find your voice.
Yeah.
Because for so long you were speaking with a voice, but it was a voice of the administration on behalf of somebody else, right? So tell me a little bit about who is Karine Jean-Pierre, who is her voice.
I was listening to the introduction about me before we came out, and I loved when the intersection piece of what I'm trying, who I am and what I want to achieve, and how I want to be a connector, how I want to continue to speak for vulnerable people, how I want to make sure that I'm using my platform in that way that's effective, that matters. And all of those things are still very true today. The reason I ended up in this job is because I was passionate about that, passionate about helping people, passionate about hopefully changing people's lives for the better, passionate about giving people a platform for folks who feel like they are voiceless or don't have an opportunity to share how they feel. And so that is very much, continues to be who I am. I got to do it in a different way the last 2.5, 4 years practically. And that didn't go away, but obviously I was speaking for someone else, and I was speaking for the most powerful person in the world.
You have to recalibrate, right? Because you could, maybe, and we'll get into that later, like you can slip out and go, oh, crap, I shouldn't have, you have to be able to adjust in front of that room that I sat in, probably was taking you and everybody else off behind the podium. I just think it's so fascinating. I feel like it goes well into Anushka's question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Karine, kind of on the point of representation and you wanting to speak up for people who are vulnerable in this country, as we heard from the lovely intro, you are no stranger yourself to being the first to do many of those things. You're the first Black woman, first openly queer woman, first daughter of Haitian immigrants to this country to be the face of the White House and the presidency. So, I'm just wondering, was that always the goal for you? Was White House press secretary always the end goal?
No, not at all. If you had said to me 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and said, hey, you know what, Karine, you're going to be the White House press secretary, I'd be like, no, I don't think so. No, it was not the goal. I mean, I was an incredibly shy kid, very shy. The fact that I did that job is kind of shocking to me because I was a really painfully shy child. And when I was growing up, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I grew up in an immigrant household. Some of you may feel this, what I'm about to say is in that household. I was told you have to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, like a profession that my parents understood that they believed would get you into the middle class. I grew up in a working class neighborhood. My dad was a New York City cab driver. My mom was a home health care aide. They are still living check to check, right? That is what the household, that's what I learned, that's what I knew. And so my parents really wanted their children to have better than they did. And they grew up in a dictatorship. Like, they grew up in Haiti at the time when they were there. It was very much a dictatorship. So politics was not a real thing for them. And so I never thought that I would be White House press secretary. And look, you know, I've had an interesting trajectory to the lectern, to the podium. And I would not have made that history or be at the White House in that role if it wasn't for Joe Biden, who believed in me, who believed that I was the best person to help him communicate with the American people, and who also wanted to make sure that we met the moment of where we are as a country. And I would not have that job if it wasn't for him. I will say, when you say representation, which I thought is very interesting, when I was 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, whatever, I did not know who the White House press secretary was. And I think with representation and people seeing themselves in me in that briefing room, the amount of young people that I met who are emotional or who, you know, did their book report on me was pretty, I was floored by it. I met so many 4th graders, 5th graders, 6th graders who knew who I was and felt seen, and they believed and they wanted to be the White House press secretary. So representation is incredibly powerful. It matters. And it has been, you're going to hear me continue to say this, it's been an honor and a privilege to be in that role, because what it has, not just because of what I was able to do and how I represented the administration, but what it meant to so many young people.
Powerful, but I can imagine a lot of pressure too. Being the first in anything means you have to be so good that you aren't the last. I covered Harris's campaign, and both times that's often something that she thought about. And many of us, I'm sure we think about, we're first in so many different ways, not just sexuality or race. That being for me as a reporter, that's tremendous pressure just where I'm at. I'm so lucky to have so many colleagues in similar positions to me. But you're one of one. Talk to us about what that pressure looks like.
I mean, it's pretty high. You know, the job is already a cook of pressure. It's already incredibly difficult, and to be the first to add that on top of what a difficult job, some people have said, it's the hardest job in the White House, it's a hard job in whatever. People would say that to me.
Would you say that?
I'd be like, yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you, it is. You know, it was really hard. It was really difficult. And you're right. When you are the first, you don't want to be the last. It is something that the Vice President Harris would say, that her mom told her about not being the last. And you do. You have to overperform. You have to outperform. You have to be better than everybody before you, because you don't want to be the last. You want people to see you doing the job and say, oh, yeah, okay, that we can see someone else who looks like you to be in that job. And so there is a lot of pressure. And I represent many communities, so you don't want to disappoint those communities. And I don't want to disappoint the president. I didn't want to do that. And so it is incredibly it's very much a lot of pressure. And you just have to learn how to maneuver and manage through that and still show up, not just for everyone else, but for yourself.
You know, were there any times, I'm curious, you brought up the word disappoint more than once, that you felt disappointed in yourself? Or do you feel like every day you were, you know,
I think
happy?
I was the hardest person. The hardest person was me, right? I was really hard on myself, right? And that's just the reality of accomplishing what I was able to accomplish. Yeah. I was my biggest critic. I was my harshest critic. One of the things, and I say this often, that I didn't do was I didn't read anything good about myself. I didn't read anything bad about myself, because I also tried to stay very focused. Like, I didn't need to for people to tell me what I did wrong. I knew if I did something wrong, if I could have done something better. I knew. And so I worked on that and tried to be better the next day or the next time. And so I was certainly my harshest critic, because I know what it meant for me to be in this job. Mm-hmm. And I know how, it could change things for others. So yeah, it was a lot of pressure. The hardest critic right here, sitting right here.
Sure. Pretty relatable too. I feel like we can all be our own worst enemies.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this recent article for Vanity Fair.
Oh.
We could speak an hour about that article, but I was struck by something you wrote in Vanity Fair, and I'm going to quote from it and tell me if I'm doing a good job. Society doesn't allow women of color to be vulnerable at work. Point blank period is what you wrote. I added the point blank period. What parts of yourself were you holding back when you were writing that?
So let me just start from here. So that Vanity Fair article, it was an op-ed that I wrote. It came out on January 21st. I wanted the article to come out on January 21st. And the reason I'm saying this, it came out after we all left the White House, after the president was done. Mm-hmm. Because I did not feel I could share what was in that article during that time. And just so that for those who have not read the article, I wrote an op-ed and I wanted to tell my story. Because if you think about it, for 2.5 years in the job, I couldn't defend myself. I couldn't talk about what I was going through. Because I couldn't. It wasn't about me. I could not. If I'm the story, there's a problem.
Right, you've lost the room, but then that's the briefing the entire week,
right,
or maybe the next week, too.
Right, exactly. So I couldn't tell my story. And during the time I was at the White House as the press secretary, my relationship ended, my mom got colon cancer, and it was a tough period. And I have a 10-year-old that I have to raise. And my mom getting sick was huge, And I had to be a caregiver along with my other siblings. That meant driving up to New York every weekend when I wasn't working, really being part of her care. And I did it quietly without telling anybody, because I felt if I shared that, the president knew, a handful of people knew, but I kept it really quiet. Because I felt that if I shared that, it would be seen as an excuse, or I didn't feel safe. Really, I didn't feel safe to share that.
And to share that with the world, share that privately with reporters?
I think
I wonder what that would have been.
Because remember, my team didn't know.
Right.
My assistant didn't know. No one around knew, because I didn't want it to come up. I didn't want it to people to ask me about my mom. I didn't want it. I wanted to be very focused on the job that I was doing. But I also wanted to write the piece because I am pretty certain that many women in particular feel this. They have gone through this. And I wanted to say, look, I had the hardest job, one of the hardest jobs that you can possibly have as being a first. And this is what I went through. And I hope that you see yourself in what I was sharing in this piece. And I tell you, I wrote this piece, nobody knew about it. Like none of my colleagues knew about it, and I was like, oh God.
Mike, can you confirm? Did you know about it?
I did not.
There you go.
Nobody knew about it, and I was glad when it landed. I heard from many of my colleagues who were like, I'm so glad that you wrote that, because it was my truth, it was my turn, it was an opportunity for me to share something incredibly personal that I hope other people were able to relate to.
Do you hear from any reporters about it, too?
Yeah, I heard from many reporters who were like, wow, I didn't know you were going through this.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I got very, very much positive feedback of people saying thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Because, Anushka, this is a really interesting part of our job, is that we have this public relationship,
Yep.
which can sometimes, they could be adversarial, and
Yep.
obviously, at least, especially right now, we'll get into what's happening in the briefing room currently, but there's a whole sourcing part of the job that you do most of the day. Other time you're running back and I'm knocking on that door and be like, please open up, I want to talk to you. And lower press, and often being ignored. And I remember one time when I was covering the Trump administration, I was trying to get a meeting, and then there were a lot of calls, so I just sat there in the hallway in front of lower press until they came out and finally threw a bag of M&Ms to me and said, fine, come in, because sometimes that's just how you have to do the job, because I gotta get paid every Friday. I don't know about you guys, so sometimes you just need to get the piece of information. So I always find, hearing about those private relationships to be just as instructive as the public ones. Ones too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Karine, I want to pull on the thread of the complexities and the vulnerabilities of the job. There's the famous Michelle Obama quote from the 2016 DNC where she says, "I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves." Mm-hmm. And you spent nearly 3 years as the first Black press secretary of that house built by slaves. So, how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that really I tried to do is to not forget the enormous part of my job, or part of who I am being in the job, the historic nature of the job, if you will. And I tried to not forget that. And the way that it struck me every day was I got to walk through the gates of, or drive through the gates of the campus, the White House campus, walk through the West Wing lobby, go to my office, the White House press secretary office. 34 White House press secretaries were in this office before me who looked different than I did. And that office is the connector between the Oval Office and the press briefing room. There's supposedly equal distance. So I connect the president to the press, vice versa. And how amazing that was. And not to forget what I was being able to experience and I was part of. And I get to do this press briefing. Even if it was hard and difficult, I got to be at that lectern, standing there, taking questions, exercising in what is incredibly important, which is democracy, which was being televised across the globe for the most powerful political person in the world. And I remember I said to myself, if ever there was a day that I walked in and I didn't feel that, then I've been here too long.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you've spoken a bit about your truth and telling your truth in those spaces, and I'm just curious, was there ever a moment when you're at the lectern where what you were saying as Karine, the press secretary, was misaligned with what you believed as Karine, the daughter of Haitian immigrants?
So look, the reason why I worked for Joe Biden, for the Biden-Harris administration, is because I believed in the work that we were trying to do. I believed in what we were trying to get done. I have the pleasure of having known the president since 2009 and watching him and listening to him and seeing how he engages with the American public and listening and seeing the policies that he put forth. I would not have come back into the administration, I don't think, for anybody else. And again, I have a 10-year-old. I've lived my life. I grew up in as an immigrant household. So it was really important, if I was going to come back into the White House, that I believed in what we were trying to do. Now, as president, he has to make incredibly difficult decisions. Some of them are not popular, but he has to make incredibly difficult decisions. And so as his White House press secretary, I have to deliver that. And that's the job. It is genuinely the job. Not a policymaker. I am the person who tries to share the message that the president believes is the right thing to do on behalf of the American people. And so I trust his decision making. I trust what he wants to do on behalf of the American people. But it is difficult. It is not easy. It truly isn't. Obviously, one day he'll tell his story and speak to that. And for me, it was doing my job the best way that I could. And when you sign up for these jobs, regardless of the White House press secretary, chief of staff, senior advisor like Mike Donnellan, you understand how important it is to speak and deliver and move forward what the president wants to do. It is not about you anymore. It isn't. It truly isn't. And so that's how I moved about. That's how I was able to do my job. And there was some hard times, for sure.
Did you ever want to quit?
Did I ever want to quit? I think sometimes I would lay in bed and be like, oh my God, what is going to happen today? And I would question, I'm like, can I continue to do this, right? Because again, self-care. And so there were moments where I was like, okay, can I get up and do this over again? Can I, continue to do the job? And I would always say yes. But were there moments where I'm like, oh boy, today's going to be a day.
You were feeling it that day.
I was feeling it that day. Of course. I mean, I'm human. At the end of the day, I'm human,
Do you think there was any difference about going second versus going first? Because I know, following Jen, having someone go first. I am a truly structural question. When you're second, someone can kind of do it. You can learn from them, say, okay, I'll do that, or I won't do that. And you can come in a completely different way. Or if you're first, you can set the tone.
Well, Jen was first, and she did set the tone,
Right.
which I think was really important. That's what the president wanted. The president wanted Jen to come in to set the tone, and she had the experience, and it was amazing learning from her, and she's an incredibly good human, so I got to be able to do that and learn directly from her. And, I mean, the 4 years everything was unprecedented. We came in, thousands of people were dying a day from COVID. We were wearing masks. We were social distancing. There was a lot happening in those first 100 days, in those first year and a half, that we really need to get right. And it was not easy. And so I got to learn from Jen, and it was incredibly important. I would not do it differently. And I don't think the president would do it differently. Again, he has to speak for himself. But it was amazing to watch her, and she did set the tone. And it was important that she was able to set the tone, and she had the experience to do that because she was the comms director under, the last Democratic president, which was Obama. And so she was able to set that tone and get us in a place that was, I think, really important after the previous administration, and returning the norms that is so incredibly important in the White House, in the press briefing room, which is, the cornerstone of our democracy, making sure that we have the freedom of the press.
Right. But I could imagine reestablishing your relationships as now you are the chief press secretary with all different press. I mean, that's not easy.
Yeah, but I was the principal deputy president.
I remember I was there.
Right. No. Meaning, like, what I mean by that is I had the opportunity to develop the relationship, those, and I was at the podium pretty regularly as deputy principal press secretary.
That's true, and I think that's a good segue. And I think it would be helpful for our audience to kind of peel back the curtain of like the day-to-day of your job.
Yeah.
Because I think there's kind of a misunderstanding what we do in the White House press corps and what you do.
Yeah.
And I want to do one domestic, one international. Feel free to say, oh, this other domestic day was really important.
Yep.
And there are, I think, so many impactful days during your tenure. I want to go most recently, and then we can go back from there. I mean, personally, selfishly, I'd like for you to talk us through the morning of November 7th, 2024, which I believe was the first briefing after the election. Mm-hmm. Tell me if I'm wrong. I had to rewatch a lot of C-SPAN to jog my memory. How do you even prepare? Talk to me about November 6th. And how do you even get what's even in the binder, right?
Yeah. So just on a day-to-day, the regular operation of things and how it works to get myself to the briefing room and to do the job. I told you I woke up at 4:30. I would wake up pretty early in the morning. I would do all of my things, right, which is read in, watch cable news, I would meditate, I would work out. I had an array of things that I did in the morning. I would try to be at work by 7:30. That was my first meeting. I had an 8 o'clock. I had an 8 o'clock, 8:15, 8:40. Like, I had all these meetings within an hour and a half span. And then I would start prepping. And then I would get into the briefing room. It was probably 4 hours of prepping, getting to the briefing room, and then do the briefing. On that day, I'm trying to jog my memory, and one of the things that I would do, honestly, when we had big days like that, I would bug Mike Donnellan. And I would knock on his door and say, hey, I'm going to have a big day. Could really use some assistance on what you think is the best way to message these couple of things. But it takes a lot of people for me to get to the podium. It takes policy people, it takes the comms, it takes Mike Donnellan. I just don't go out there and just say whatever I want. I wish I would, but that's not what I do. Almost everything, every word, everything that I say has been approved. Now, I may deliver it differently, but it is pretty much signed off on, and sometimes I get it directly from the President of the United States. And when I go to the Oval and I ask him how he wants me to speak about something. I mean, look, I did go to the podium pretty much, I think it was the next day after the election, and it was tough. It was hard. But the President was very, very clear. He wanted a peaceful transfer of power. This is somebody who was a senator for many years, many decades. he was vice president and obviously the president, and he believed on the institution. He believed in the power of the presidency. He believed in the importance of leading by example. And so my job was to say, majority of Americans have made the decision. We have to respect that decision. We have to have a peaceful transfer of power. And that's the message that I had to bring, that he wanted me to bring to the podium, behind the lectern, obviously. And it was important because we needed to send a message to the American people. It was important because he wanted to lead. And remember, he was not afforded that 4 years prior. He was not given that type of respect or that peaceful transfer of power. But he himself wanted to make sure we did that. And it was important. So that was really what I was trying to do. And every question I got was like, well, you know what? The people have spoken. Majority of Americans have spoken. The president wants to make sure there's a peaceful transfer of power. That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to lead by example. And yeah, it was a heartbreaking for many of us outcome. And we even said that. I said that. Did we get the outcome that we wanted? No, we didn't. But we have to respect what the American people has told us. Yeah. And so that was the message that I was sending. That was the message that I was asked to send. That was the message that the president wanted. And he actually spoke for himself and said very much was aligned in what I was saying because I was speaking for the president.
Karine, I want to ask you another question just about the aftermath of the election and how you've been thinking about it in the last couple months. You know, there's some on the left who herald Joe Biden as the most progressive, populist president that we have ever had, and you've said that you trust him 100%, you stand by everything that he passed, but he lost. Yeah. And I'm just curious what you think in the aftermath. Where did that message get lost in translation from the White House to the American public? Yeah. What do you think landed well with what you guys were communicating, and what didn't land as well?
Look, I think there's going to be a lot of pulling back the curtain, as there has been for some time in the last couple months, about what happened. And I think there's a lot there. I really do. I think it was hard to break through. Mm-hmm. I think the messaging was very difficult to break through. It was hard to connect with the American people. We were coming out of a once-in-a-generation pandemic where people were feeling what was happening to them, the loss, and the economy. They weren't feeling that the economy was changing and was getting better, even though we had the data, even though we were trying to explain that. And that's real. And we saw what happened to G7, G10 countries around the globe with incumbents. We saw what happened. And it was an effect that we felt surely and certainly as being the incumbent ourselves. Misinformation, disinformation played a huge role. It played a very big role in this. It was hard to beat that back. Look, there was a lot of headwinds that we were dealing with, really. And we're dealing with social media, which is an ecosystem that is just 24/7, and it is so hard to break through that. And look, you think about the media had changed. There was so many things out there that it was incredibly difficult to break through. And, you know, we did the best that we could. Could we have done things differently? Absolutely. We could always do things differently.
What were the things you feel like you could have done differently?
I mean, look, pushing back on the misinformation, disinformation was difficult. That was really hard. Being able to connect with the American people about the economy, that was really hard. But they felt what they felt, you know? And it was hard to get around that, get to the other side of that. But at the same time, there was something that we were seeing globally around the world that was happening, and it was hard to stop. So, look, it was tough. It was tough to see the outcome. It's not what we wanted, obviously. I've said that already. But, you know, we have, we have hopefully another day to continue to figure out how do we move forward, continue to figure out how do we break through in a way that the American people see what we're trying to do, what the Democratic Party in this, I guess, in this form of things, how do we speak to the American public? How do we really connect? And how do we beat back what's happening, in social media, online, this misinformation, disinformation? It is tough. It is not easy.
Yeah, and we'll get there. And I think it's so
Yeah.
fascinating. The media ecosystem has changed so much.
Yeah.
And there's some news today I feel like kind of fits in well in this part of the conversation, as we just heard that the White House, the Trump administration, is now saying that they would like to choose who is in the White House pool. And we can go and kind of explain what the White House pool is. And it's not a place you could swim anymore. And
It's built on top of a pool.
It is. Well, my office,
President
my
Nixon.
workspace was underground with the rats in the pool. Sorry, mice. And I'm just curious to your reaction to this news and what it means for the White House to single out and say this radio reporter, this wire reporter, this TV reporter will be covering the president, and that's it.
So my first briefing, Jen's first briefing, my last briefing, one of the things that we talked about was the freedom of the press, the importance of the freedom of the press, the importance of having that healthy back and forth. And the president wanted to bring that back, and we were able to do that. My last press briefing, I talked about how we did more than 500 briefings. I did more than 300 briefings and talked about in a real way, in a data-based way, and also just kind of the history of democracy, the importance of the cornerstone of our democracy, and the freedom of the press being the fourth of state, if you think about it, keeping us accountable. And I talked about that. And one of the things that I said is, I hope this continues in my last press briefing. I really hope that continued. Because we knew what could be possible. We knew what could happen. And, we have to do everything that we can to protect our democracy. It is on all of us, each and everyone in here, to do that. And what I'm seeing now is scary. It's scary. What you all saw, those who watched the press briefing and the back and forth, it was contentious. It could be adversarial, but that's the job. That is what's important if you are part of an administration. It is important to do that. It is important for the American people to see this administration take any administration. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Democrats and Republicans who have been in the administration have done this. There's been press secretaries who, it didn't matter if they had a D or an R behind them. They did this. They showed how important it was to do this in the briefing room, to show the American people and show the world. The press briefing is televised globally. And as the United States, we are showing the world what democracy looks like, what exercising in democracy looks like. And that's why it was so important to hold a press briefing. And we took questions, not just from the mainstream media. We took questions from non-traditional media, right-leaning media. We took questions from them. And we didn't shy away from that because it was important to do that. And when you take that away, when you do not do that, then where's the democracy? Where's that healthy back and forth? Where's the accountability?
Well, on that last point, I believe the current White House Correspondents Association has put out a statement, and just for those who haven't been following, the White House press pool is a very small group of reporters, usually a wire, a photographer, a print reporter who acts basically as a stenographer of saying, here's what the president is saying, who they're meeting with, what's happening, or movements. A radio reporter, usually it's 4 or 5 people, and these people are privileged enough to follow the president and do the good work of letting the whole public know, a bunch of other press organizations know what's going on. Mm-hmm. And the Trump administration is saying that they would like to kind of handpick who those people are, setting up a precedent that even there's a Democratic president in office and say, okay, I only want MSNBC. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah.
and shutting the entire thing out of the process, which would be very difficult.
Yeah, and it's
someone like my job.
They're called the protective pool. It's 13 members of the press, and it's the protective pool because in case something happens to the president, there's the pool there that is able to capture it, able to report it. And they go with the president wherever the president is. It is so incredibly important. And, you know, again, this is about democracy. It is about making sure that an administration is held accountable. It is not supposed to be partisan. Is not about creating a system where only one side is being heard. That is not what this is about. And so in our administration, in this Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration, we tried to bring that norm back because we understood how important it was to have the freedom of the press. Even when we didn't agree with them, it didn't matter. Right? Even when it was contentious in that room, that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that we are exercising in something that is really, right, part of who we are as a country. And we are also leading. We're supposed to be leading the world. And so, you know, we got to continue to fight for democracy. That includes the freedom of the press. It's very much part of how we work as a country.
And Karine, you said, you know, it's on all of us to protect democracy. And I think, you know, I'm curious what you think. Is it also on all of us to break news about democracy? You know, a question from my generation is, what do you think of having non-legacy media in the room? You know, podcasters, influencers, people get their information from so many different sources now.
And that's a great question. One of the things that we did try to do was bring influencers into the White House. We held like the first White House party for influencers. There's a lot that we did to make sure the president did interviews with influencers, podcasts, because we understood that there are 300 million people in this country, and not all of them get their information, right, from what's happening in the briefing room. That's maybe the briefing room reaches 20 million plus people, right? And so how do you get in touch? How do you connect with everyone else? And so we tried to do that. It was important to make sure that we were talking to other people that was not part of the traditional media. We truly did try to do that. And to your point, Americans, you know, people get their news and information differently. They do. They get it very differently. Now, the hard part for everyone who is trying to get information or trying to get a sense of what the administration, the government, whatever, whoever is what they're doing on your behalf is, it is on you to make sure what you're getting is factual. You now have to do the fact check. You do. You now have to fact check the information that you're getting. I mean, we were just talking about misinformation, disinformation. That is a real thing that we now all have to do. When we see something, we have to be like, okay, is this right? Where's the source? Can I trust this information?
Yeah, we're really challenging media literacy these days.
And that's where we are today.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, in both traditional and non-traditional media. But going off of Nusha's question, what the Trump administration is doing differently is now they're saying, guess what? And where the staff used to sit, now Joe Rogan, if you want to come, you can come. Anybody can have a hard pass, and it doesn't matter who sits where. In fact, the wires, you're in the back. Whoever you want can be in the front. Good idea?
Look, what I believe is it is important to have people who disagree with you or not necessarily sees your view, or certainly is not a partisan, ideological part of the process in the room. It is important to be held accountable. It is important that the American people have an opportunity to hear everything that you have to say on an issue. That's what's important. And we kept that tradition. We did. We came in, we called on AP, which is the tradition. The first couple of rows were mainstream, kind of traditional media that did not agree with us.
Some adversarial, some often adversarial.
Exactly, and you know, and I mean that's what we tried to do because it was really important to show that, to be leaders in that, and that's what I can speak to. That, I think, is what is important. That's what I think the American people want to see, right? They want to see, okay, what's going on here? What is the messaging? What are you talking about? How are you being held accountable? Accountability is incredibly important. We would not bring in partisan ideological folks and in the room.
I'll let Joe Rogan, let's say. Do you think you would have?
I mean, look, what I will say is, it is important to continue what has been done for so many years, which is a healthy back and forth with reporters, with journalists, and talking about the issues that matter to the American people and being held to account.
Right.
That is what's important. And that's what we tried to do. And that's what we wanted to do. That's what the president wanted to do, to bring back those norms. So,
Karine, I want to ask you a quick question before I think we'll turn over to audience questions. Who do you think right now is the best communicator in the Democratic Party?
oh. I mean, when I tell you I've been pretty low-key this last month, it's really true. Like, I haven't honestly watched cable news or news. I've been pretty quiet. I know that we have a lot of...
No governors come to mind?
Well, I know that we have a lot of great leaders out there. I think we do. I think there are a lot of important leaders out there in the Democratic Party. I'll say this. I think what's important is there are vulnerable communities out there who are under attack. There are people who are really, really afraid and really scared. And I think it is on all of us, especially folks who have platforms, who are leaders, to speak up, to speak out, and to protect people who feel like they are voiceless and do not have a platform. And that's what, when you think about leaders or governors, whoever, that is one of the reasons that's what they're elected to do, to make people's lives better and for people to feel safe. And I think that should be the first thing that they lead with. That's the first thing that they do. And we really do have to figure out as a party, who are we? What are we fighting for? What is important? How do we move forward? And so that's what I want to see. Whoever comes out of that as leaders, that's great.
And I'm not asking you to, there's no gray smoke coming out of the chimney here. I truly mean that, because I talk to a lot of Democrats and a lot of people since I've been here at Harvard say, who the hell do I look to? I'm a Democrat and I know to set, and who are some communicators in our party who can help us lead the way? Not that they're automatically going to be at the convention, but there's no one you think about who goes, wow, I really think they're doing a good job.
I actually don't have anybody that I'm going to call out or put out there. I'm not. But I think that it is important it doesn't matter if you're a governor, Congress, senator, a local elected official.
Former vice president.
Former vice president. People are hurting. People are hurting. People are scared. And it's important that we show fight, and it's important that we are very clear on how we're going to protect those people. Yeah. That's what I want to see. I think that's what's important. You lead with that. And I want to see many voices. I don't just want to see one. I want to see many who can lead us through this time. And I think that's really important. And that's what I believe. If anything, doesn't matter if you are in the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, whatever, independent, whatever you are, I think in general, just widespread, that's what people want to see. And I think that's what's important.
I think that's a great point as any to open up to audience questions here, Karine. We have 4 microphones here. And you don't need to identify yourself, but if you would like to, we're happy to hear it. We'll start here and go there, and we'll go for as long as we need to.
All right.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Jean-Pierre. My question is about the unique challenges during your tenure of working with a president who, despite his many strengths, we all seem to have witnessed a marked decline in his communication abilities. I'm not going to speak to the cognitive abilities, but I think we all witnessed, at least during the last 2 years, what the unique challenges were being sort of the spokesperson for the administration. I don't know the exact numbers, but it struck me that the president would took many fewer individual press conferences, many fewer individual appearances, just like what the challenges were in that role?
Well, look, a couple things, and I appreciate the question. I know a lot of people think, have that question or think about that or wonder what was happening and how we maneuvered through all of that. Look, the president spoke to it himself. He was very honest. He was like, look, I don't speak as well as I used to. I don't move as well as I used to. He was very honest about what the American people were seeing. So he never hid from that. He was pretty clear on that. And what I would say, and I know, I appreciate that you said you wouldn't speak to the cognitive, because this is a president that was pretty successful in what he was able to do, especially coming out of a once-in-a-generation pandemic, and the amount of historical pieces of legislation that is going to matter and make and change people's lives for generations to come. And he was one of the most effective presidents. What he was able to get done in a term, most presidents generally were not being able to done in two terms. And what I saw, I could only speak from my personal experience. I was with him a lot. I was in the Oval a lot. This is a person who had the experience, and because he had the experience, understood the questions to ask, understood how to move forward in incredibly difficult times, and had to make difficult decisions. I learned from him in my tenure in the job. And he was very honest about what people saw and how people perceived him. He was. And as far as it comes to interviews, look, this was a different media landscape. It really was. He wanted to talk about issues, and it was very hard to have interviews where we were able to talk about issues. And what we did, and this was part of the question that I got moments ago, we did focus on influencers. We did do something different that others didn't do. We did try to talk to podcasts. We actually wanted to communicate to the people who were not able to be in the room, and tens more millions of people who got to see the president in a different way. So we tried to do that. We tried to be creative. We tried to be smart. And we tried to break through in that way. And some of these influencers that we spoke to, 20 million people saw the interview. And that's something we wouldn't have gotten through other means or the normal way of doing things. And so, that was the process that we thought would be really important. We wanted to bring people who normally don't have that access to the president to be in the room with him, to see him for themselves, to be in the Oval Office, to be at the White House. And I would say many of them truly appreciated that opportunity. And so that was what we tried to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it.
Over here.
Yeah, hi. My name's Ethan. I'm a senior at the college studying government, and this has honestly been really helpful and really informational. On this large topic around trust in government and trust in media and trust in people like you who speak directly to the American public, it looks like the public really is souring on a lot of the administrative officials talking about what they're doing in government, and just in general, trust is low in our federal agencies. And so building on that, you think about the growth in new media that has been also a topic of conversation tonight on podcasts and influencers across a variety of different social media networks, where Donald Trump's campaign arguably did very well this past cycle and continued to do well since he has won the election through his inauguration and through now. And so I do wonder and ask, how does the next Democratic campaign tackle such a hurdle where this new media has been built up in a way that is so positive towards the Republican Party? And should they get there, how does the next Democratic administration, forgive me, build back better?
We love Build Back Better. I just have a lot of thoughts about that. Look, you're right. We have to, the Democratic Party has to do a lot more work in dealing with the new media, a lot more work in talking to influencers and podcasts. We truly tried to do that. And if you look at the interviews that the president did. We tried to break through. We just have to do more of it. And because majority of Americans, I mean, how many people here have cable TV?
My hand's not up either.
That's not that many people. I don't have cable at home. And I was the White House press secretary.
I work for a news organization. I don't have
Yeah, I mean, You know, I don't have it at home. And so that means, there's hardly anybody raised their hands. So that means that there's other ways that millions of Americans are getting their information. And so we have to meet people where they are. And it's going to take a lot more work to get that done. But also, misinformation, disinformation is a big deal. It actually plays into this too. It really does. I'm going to tell you a story really quickly. So about a year and a half ago, there was a post that popped up on, I believe, X. And it was a picture of me, a picture of a white Bronco with an Ohio State plate. And basically it said, White House press secretary arrested for DUI. The White House is hiding it. And I saw it. Somebody flagged it for me. And I was like, whatever. This is not real. It's not true. And it went viral. It went it went haywire. It was all over the place. And one thing about me that people who have known me for a decade or more, they know that I don't drink. I do not drink alcohol. That is something that I have not done for a long time. And so people were like, oh, this is, they inherently knew, like they knew that it wasn't true, but it was going all over the place. And the right wing had taken it, and it just kept on going. It got so bad that the mainstream media reached out to my team and was like, hey, we know that Karine doesn't drink, we know that, but this is all over the place. We need a statement. Like, can you guys debunk this? And I actually got really annoyed. I'm like, what? I mean, obviously, if you look at the post, it's not real. And if I have this right, I think the person who posted it might have been a bot or it had hardly any followers. It didn't come from a real source. And so what I wanted to do, because I have a 10-year-old and I don't want my daughter ever to like Google me and see this article, all these articles. So my team put out independent fact checker. They didn't put out, they went to independent fact checkers so that it could be debunked. And we got about 3 or 4 independent fact checkers to debunk it. And so now that lives out there. But can you imagine that it was so hard, that this thing went viral, and it was so hard so bad, I should say, that even mainstream media, people who knew me, had to question it. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's probably one thing about me that wasn't true. I'm sure there were many other things, but that's what was out there. And it is really difficult to beat that back. And it really is on everyone here to make sure, as you're reading things, you have to be your own fact checker. You do. I got lucky that my team was able to reach out to, this independent sources so that they can beat it back, or we could beat it back. But it had real legs. And that's the reality of where we are with misinformation and disinformation.
Totally. Thank you. Up here?
Oh, hi.
Hi, my name's Adam. I'm a sophomore here at Harvard. I wanted to ask you, kind of on a similar to the first question, just about, I guess maybe just with the time, one anecdote that you found was particularly challenging about the 3-week period between the debate against President Trump that President Biden had and when he dropped out, one particularly challenging moment, or if you think that the president should have dropped out earlier, or if you think that he should have ran at all.
So just your last question first. He's the president of the United States at the time. He was the leader of the Democratic Party. It was truly his decision to make on what he wanted to do, and I supported that 100%. Whatever it was, I was going to support that 100% because he had the right to, as the leader of the Democratic Party, coming out of a pretty successful midterms. There was supposed to be a red wave. There wasn't a red wave. One of the reasons was because of what we were able to do and how Democrats, whether in their congressional House seats or in the states, were able to communicate for themselves on what we were able to do. And so I think that's important. We can't forget what was happening when he made the decision to run for re-election. And I believe as, again, the leader of the Democratic Party, he had the right to make that decision, and he made it, and I supported it. Whatever he had decided, I would have supported. Look, personally, I think what was the toughest thing to see in the 3 weeks was there was a disconnect for me, what was happening with leadership in the Democratic Party and how it was truly, as my former colleague, communications director Ben LeBolt said, it was a firing squad, and I had never seen anything like it before. I'd never seen a party do that in the way that they did, and it was hurtful and sad to see that happening. A firing squad around a person who I believe was a true patriot, a person who I believe did everything that he can for this country, a person who I believe, as I mentioned before, has done more in one term than most presidents had done in 2 terms, historical things. And I was shocked by what I was seeing.
And Karine, just to clarify, these are other Democrats and Democratic leadership coming out against Biden.
Yep, I had never seen anything like that. That was, if you're asking me, the thing that I saw in those 3 weeks, that was shocking. Shocking. And instead of coming together to really be unified and trying to figure out how do we save our democracy, how do we fight back, that's what I was seeing. And, you know, that's what we decided to do for 3 weeks. And, you know, it was truly, truly unfortunate. And I think it hurt us more than I think folks realized to have done that.
And I know we're coming, and thank you so much for your question.
Thank you so much for your question.
I know we're coming up on time. If you could ask your question very quick, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug my Darwin Study Group. Any other questions you have, whether Wednesdays at 4:30, Mike? Come bother Mike and ask him all of these questions, so I know he's very happy to talk. Sign up for his office hours in the meantime. But we'll have this one final question, and then we'll wrap. I know we have to get you out of here, Karine.
Yeah.
Hi,
Let's go back to my kid who's waiting for me.
I'm Key. I'm a senior at the college. You had mentioned earlier the struggle between connecting with Americans on misinformation, and it also seemed like you were struggling to connect with them on a personal level. Honestly, earlier when you said that, when you talked about your background, I was really surprised, but I realized that too often we're speaking as speaking for most of Americans, or maybe generalization, but that I perceive people in the White House as more of like a estranged entity of power, more than like a person before me. So do you think that if you were able to share your background sooner with Americans, maybe to even bring back some tangible humanity beyond just a face on the screen, that it would have strengthened or created a tie between you and them?
So I appreciate that question. And here's the thing that's very interesting, that there were moments at the podium, behind the lectern, where something happened that I had to speak to that I got emotional. My first briefing, I had to talk about the shooting in Buffalo. And I decided when I was doing the topper that I wanted to talk about every person that was killed and who they were. And that was heavy. You have a black community, people are going to the supermarket, living their lives, and they were not able to walk out to go back to their family. And that was a personal decision that I made. Then, less than 2 weeks later, Uvalde happened. Children were killed, murdered. They were the same age as my daughter, same grade. I had to talk about that. And that was emotional for me, because you think about your own life, you think about that. And so there were moments that were emotional, that were difficult to talk about, that I had to do in that briefing room, and I was able to connect with people because I felt it. I felt it. But the job, honestly, the job is not about me. I think I talked about, I can't be the story. I'm not supposed to be the story. You know, that's like Comms 101. If you're the story, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? I can't. And while representation matters and it was important for people in different communities to see me and to feel seen, that's really, really important. And I hope people felt that. But it wasn't really truly not about me. But there were moments like that was incredibly difficult to have to connect, and the way I was able to connect because I felt it personally. And the reason why I wrote the Vanity Fair article and I waited till the end, because I didn't feel like I could be vulnerable. And again, it couldn't be about me, but I wanted to tell my side of things. So, you know, that's just the way that the direction that I wanted to take. But I really do hope that in the 2.5 years that I got to have this job, that I was able to do this really important high pressure job and present on behalf of the President and the United States, that I do hope people felt heard. I do hope people felt seen. And I do hope people felt that we were trying to do everything that we can to help folks, to help people, the most vulnerable. You would hear me say that a lot at the podium. We were trying to make sure that people who were normally left behind, who felt like they were not seen, the vulnerable communities felt seen in this administration. And that's the policies that we put forth. Those are the actions that we tried to take.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, big claps for Anushka and Karine. If you have any job news, you can call us at ABC or us at Harvard. We'd be happy to break
Brittany's
it.
very curious about my next job. I am too.
Thank you guys so much for coming out, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. You're a great audience.